Welcome back. It's Alyssa. I'm out of breath, and I have a book review for you. Hello, friends. I recently finished the book Hester by Laurie, Lico, Albanese, and I need to talk to you about this book. This is the story of the real Hester Prynne, the woman who may have inspired Nathaniel Hawthorne to write his famous book, The Scarlet Letter, the book that all US high school students have probably suffered through reading at some point in time in their high school careers. A book that I know I once owned, but probably promptly unowned, unhauled, discarded as soon as I was done reading it for school because why would I keep it? I was a teenager. I didn't like these kinds of things. Now, as an adult, I'm like, where's my copy of The Scarlet Letter? Because I just read this book and I really want to freaking know how much it's like the real thing. If you don't remember The Scarlet Letter, essentially you have Hester Prynne, who is a woman who gets, vilified because she's a woman and she has a child out of wedlock, and it's never the man's fault, it's always the woman's fault. She gets branded with this scarlet letter, is ostracized by society. She is also an accomplished seamstress, lace maker, something of that nature. She is so good that the ladies of the town really want to have pieces made by her. Also, there's some sort of like naughtiness associated with having like this outsider, outcast lady, this tainted woman having a piece of her work. Like you're like daring for having it. Anyway, bad things ensue. Women's rights didn't exist. Anyway, so this book may or may not be based on somebody that Hawthorne actually knew in real life. This is kind of like a common thing to occur. Women would take on the brunt of all the shame of anything having to do with adultery, and men got off scot-free. Tale as old as time. So historians have always kind of speculated on whether or not there is a real Hester Prynne. Who is she? Who might she have been? What would her life have been like? And this story, Hester, takes that and creates a potential Hester, a real potential Hester for the character to be based on, in the form of Isabel Gamble. And Isabel Gamble is a Scottish woman who comes across from Scotland to Salem, and she is married to somebody who at first she thought was quite a respectable and good match. Turns out he's a louse and he's just, addicted to opium, and he's a drunk and he like loses all their money. And, again, tale as old as time. And so they meet this sea captain on the way there who's quite kind and encourages Isabel to pursue her embroidery and her talents and her art. She's a very skilled embroiderer and seamstress. Eventually, this sea captain and her husband go out to sea for quite a long time. And Isabel, I keep wanting to call her Hester, Isabel is left to fend for herself in Salem. And one day she meets the sexy fuckboy that is Nathaniel Hawthorne. And Nathaniel Hawthorne is your typical, like, brooding, shabby chic gentleman, like impoverished gentleman, right? Like he's got the name, he's got the status, he does not have the money. It's all threadbare, and he's, broody and like walking around town, and he's like into the arts. He's that guy. And he and Isabel strike up a relationship. They take it to the natural place that it goes when you like somebody. Is that mommy's mind? And eventually a baby is made. And then she tries to hide it for as long as possible, and she can't hide it for very long. And her husband comes home and is like, "You're a little ho-ho. Whose baby is it?" Because she thought her husband was basically like lost at sea. Turns out he wasn't. And like things just take, an interesting turn from there. And I'm not going to spoil everything, but basically, you get to see the potential inspiration for Hester Prynne in this story. And the overall feeling I had walking away after reading this was that men suck. basically. The sea captain, whose name is currently escaping me, he is wonderful. He really supports Isabel. He really sees her as a person in her own right and not just some woman. He doesn't seem to care about any of her faults. He sees her as a human being. He's like the only really good guy in our like three main white dude characters. The only other men in this book that are good are pretty much all the free Black people that are living in this town. And it is interesting because this does talk about the slave trade and the connections that people in Salem have to the slave trade. It talks about how free slaves can be brought back to the South if they get found by like slave hunters. An interesting story that weaves in more than just this idea of like, who is the woman that is Hester Prynne? It has some social commentary in it. You see Isabel being shocked by the whole premise of slavery at like in general, and how racism, she's like, I don't understand it. This book was beautifully written. One of the things about Isabel that's really interesting as like a character trait is that she has synesthesia. So part of her art comes out in the fact that she can see colors when she hears words, like words and letters are associated with colors in her mind, and that's how she embroiders. It's part of her art and her creativity, her creative spirit. It's something that she considers sort of witchcraft. There's a lot of discussion of witches. I mean, you have Salem, so of course there's always kind of going to be this harkening back to the witch trials, but also Isabel has a family member in her past who was executed for being a witch, and so she feels like because she has synesthesia that this is witchcraft, and she kind of worries about it because she doesn't understand it, and she's like, how do I control something I don't understand, which is a very legitimate concern. And it's also interesting to see how colors change, like certain people, whether they're good or bad, or whether they're lying to her, telling the truth, the colors sort of change. Some people talk to her and everything is in like shades of gray, and then other people talk to her and there's like a kaleidoscope of colors. So it's a really interesting book. It's a beautiful book. I really loved this exploration into who could be the inspiration for Hester Prynne, and I think it's really interesting. There's a lot of use of embroidery as code work. There's another character in this book that she meets and they befriend each other based on their like seamstress skills. So she learns from this woman that this art of like hiding words inside of your embroidery. So she starts to do that, and that's part of the language of this clandestine relationship she has with Nathaniel Hawthorne. And it's just really interesting to think of Nathaniel Hawthorne as this like broody fuckboy, because he very well could have been, we don't know, but he very well could have been. And to think about like these old white dude classic authors that we have to suffer through high school being like the fuckboys of the 18 whatevers is just, it's a very interesting and sort of funny thing to think about. I really enjoyed it. I would encourage you, if you want like a nice historical fiction to read, I would read this. I do now want to reread The Scarlet Letter to see the parallels between these two stories, but I'm kind of dreading it because I don't remember liking it when I was in high school. But then again, I didn't like a lot of things that I read in high school that I've reread as an adult, and I'm like, these are really great. So we'll see. If you've read this, I'd love to know your thoughts. Otherwise, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in my next video, whatever it may be, because it's my channel and I can do whatever I want. Bye.
So just sit with me, talking to the night until the morning, building chemistry. I don't think I ever wanna go come closer next to me. Trying to find another way to say this, but I think